Hi, welcome to Community Homeworks. We have our first class for 2022 this evening, and it will be covering weatherization and energy efficiency with our faithful instructor, Lee Taylor. We're glad you're joining us. If you have any questions or comments along the way, please put it in the comment section on the bottom of your screen, and we would be happy to get those and try to answer any of those questions that we can. We are glad you're joining us. We have another workshop scheduled next week. Next Tuesday, we'll be talking about frozen pipes and what to do if your pipes freeze. But tonight, we're talking weatherization. And Lee, are you ready to talk to us?
Yep. All right. You said people can always chime in while they're watching it and ask questions and stuff.
Lori, you're going to have to unmute him because I can't unmute him.
All right. I think we got it. Technical difficulties, right? All right. So yeah, like Jason said, if you have questions, please type them in, and we'll try to answer them. I guess if you are watching this after the fact, you can always send them a question, and hopefully we'll be able to get to it next time we're on. This class is weatherization. This class really dives into a lot of other classes, but like I said, I'm going to kind of concentrate on the basic things that you can do to be able to help with the energy efficiency of your home. I'm going to start with some of the easiest ways and move on to moderate and then a little more difficult. But I do want to go through and explain some things real quick. So a couple things with understanding weatherization in your home and stuff. The first off is, like I said, heat travels from hot to cold in that direction. So the reason I say that is, if you have, a lot of people think of weatherization in the wintertime when they're getting drafts and whatnot in their home when their home is cold. And what's happening there is generally you have your warm air in the inside and it's much colder outside, so that air is moving towards the outside, towards that colder air. Now, the thing is that the weatherization that we're going to be talking about is also good for, let's say you're running air conditioning and you have hot outside, cold inside. What's going to happen is that you're going to have the hot air from the outside trying to push into the cooler house. So it's good to understand just that sort of dynamic as far as how that heat transfers back and forth. A little guide to my crazy picture here. This is just hot air flow. And this is cold air flow. And I'll get to this a little bit better later. The other part is R value. And you may have heard that. There's something I wrote on there. It's really bad handwriting. But the higher the number of the R value, the slower heat or cold will move through that material, if that makes sense. So if you have something that's R2 versus something that's R13, the R13 is going to hold in that heat. That's probably the easiest way to say it. Slow that heat down, as far as migrating through. It never stops it, but it just slows it down. So the higher the R value, the more insulating value it has, properties it has. The other part is that most people, when they're talking about weatherization, they really kind of concentrate on that R value I was talking about, whether it's with insulation or other forms of being able to obtain that R value. And that is an important part. But it's only part of kind of the whole. So I want to go through the other part of the weatherization that is pretty important. And what that is air infiltration. So on this picture here, I'm showing basic air infiltration. I mean, you're going to get it from a lot of places, but basically what I'm saying is that if you have a penetration, something going through your exterior wall, and that could be, anything from, a wire popping to the outside to a water spigot to gaps around your doors or gaps around your windows, into something what's called unconditioned space. So basically, when you're looking at your home, the area that you're living in is considered conditioned space, and then anything outside of that is considered unconditioned space. And again, back to that, how hot air moves, it's going to move from your warm house. Let's say it's 70 degrees, and let's say it's 20 degrees outside. That warm air is going to be able to move through all of those gaps where air can move through. We're going to be talking about that because that's usually the biggest one that people will feel that. They'll feel that draft or something along that line. That's usually what gets them to be able to start, wanting to crank the heat up or something along that line. So we're going to talk about sealing up those penetrations and where you're going to find those. This is representing your attic. This is just insulation. I'm not going to say what type of insulation is. There's all sorts of types: blown in, cellulose, fiberglass. There's a lot of different styles of insulation. And all this is doing is slowing this heat down. But this is showing little areas where there are gaps, and that air is firing through those gaps up into your attic or out into unconditioned space. Right. So that's the real quick down and dirty on R value and air movement and stuff like that. So we will start with some of the most basic of air leakage in a home. And I'm going to pick on this door first. So come on this side. And most people, like I said, most people have doors that are similar to this. We'll talk about other style of doors also. You have weather stripping that runs all the way around your door. We talk about this quite a bit in the door maintenance class. But what can happen is that this weather stripping, over time, it's just foam. What can happen is that it can compress. It can get torn, especially on the strike side. And what will happen is that when that door closes, it may not seal up against this. No matter if it's on the strike side, on the top, or on the hinge side. I said this runs all the way around. So you want to look at your weather stripping. So what's a real easy way to be able to do this? Well, there is a nice, easy way. What you do is get a flashlight and shut your door. I'm not going to do that to this one. But you shut your door and you have it, dark on one side. So do it in the evening or something. And, somebody else is on the outside. And what they're doing, actually, I will shut the door. What they're doing is you want to make sure your door is shut just like it normally would be. And you're going to get that flashlight and you're going to shine right in around the edge. And that will show all these little gaps and everything else. It's a nice way to be able to see if that weather stripping is actually coming into contact with the door. If you're seeing light go through there, and you can also do it like if it's a bright day and you got a darker house, you can also do the same thing where you're looking at it and seeing if you see any of that daylight coming through. But a flashlight, nice bright flashlight, works out too. And you want to run all the way around top, strike side, hinge side, and the bottom. You want to run along here because this door doesn't have it, but there's a sweep that goes on this. It's actually an inset, and that gets beat up over time. So like I said, doing that is a nice simple way to be able to see where those gaps and whatnot are. If you're noticing that you're having a lot of gaps, you can go to most any of the box stores. And with this style, you can pull this out. And you can go buy new strips. I will say this. They have real inexpensive strips that are really squishy. And they have some strips that are a little bit better, kind of like an upgrade, where it's a little bit thicker. It's a little more resilient. And then you can just put the new weather stripping right back in, have this little fin here, and you're able to fit this in. You'd be doing the same thing on the top and the side. And you're pressing it in like this, and you're working your way down. And then sometimes at the bottom, it may be stretched out, so you get a pair of scissors and cut it. And you do that on, it doesn't, you don't have to do all sides. Let's say it's only showing on one side or the other. Yeah. And then you just buy a strip like this and cut it for whatever width your door is. So that's that style weather stripping. And as I said, there's a couple of different styles depending on the door you have. Sometimes the weather stripping that you may have is something along the lines, like this. That may be a nail-on style. There's all sorts of types. But again, if you talk to the hardware store or something along that line, sometimes you might see ones that are like this. They may even have a rigid part, and that gets nailed on or attached so that door closes up against it. Again, it sort of depends on the style door you have, but most of the time people have door styles like this, most of the time. So like I said, whatever kind of weather stripping you have, it all is prone to, get old, get brittle, get compacted, and be able to let that air leak through. The other part is, if you have this style door, most of the time, this threshold is adjustable. So what I did is there's little caps. If you're lucky, they're still on. And I just pop those off, set them somewhere where I'm not going to lose them. And I look inside here and I see little screws. There's actually a spring action in here. And if I were to turn these counterclockwise, it's going to raise this up. Clockwise is going to drop it down. And what that does is that, let's say the weather strip underneath here that's actually inset into the door, and we get into that more in door class, is worn out, and you replace that, and you close your door, and you're still seeing, that light coming through. You can raise this threshold up just a little bit, and you can raise up just this side, or just this side, or just the middle. Each one is kind of independent. So sometimes irregularities, it can kind of deal with that. There's a little bit of playing around. You want to make sure you can still operate the door. I've seen it where people ride this thing up so high that all of a sudden you have to body slam the door to open it, and that's not a good thing. So you can do minor adjustments on that type of threshold. Other types of thresholds may have a weather strip that you actually have to insert in there. Usually those are older style ones. Like I said, basically you want to stop that air from being able to move out or move in. So that type of weather stripping is a relatively easy fix. So that's any exterior door. Some of the other easy areas is that this was talked about. This was talked about in one of the other weatherization classes. I like this. I'm gonna pick on this guy. I'll move this up to A for a minute. So the other is with old style windows like this, a lot of times you see this void in here because they have weights that actually operate the sashes and stuff. So those can get a little bit difficult because you can't use a foam or anything in there because he'll lock these up. So in that case, imagine you have drywall here. They talk about caulking and stuff. So like I said, tube of caulk will really make it so that it's going to stop that air leakage. Doesn't have good R value or anything along that line, but it does stop that air migration through that area. Sometimes what you can do is you can actually almost feel that air moving through. One of the tricks you can do, you got to be a little careful, is to put your house on a little bit of a negative pressure. When I say that, you run like a bath fan, anything that's going to really expel air out. So like if you're on your bath fan and say you have a dryer and you can kick your dryer on, it's going to put that house on a little bit of a negative pressure, and it's going to pull air in and exaggerate that, and you'll be able to feel those areas where that air is migrating through. And then you'll be able to get in there and be able to caulk them out. And so, like I said, caulk is another one. They went through, and it depends on what it is that you're working on, whether it can be a paintable caulk or a silicone style caulk. That is one thing you're going to have to be able to know. A lot of times, if you're doing where two pieces of material meet, say like on trim or something along that line, you're going to want to use some kind of a paintable caulk where those two materials meet. You may feel that gap, or you may even see that and be able to feel that air moving through there. You wouldn't want to use a silicone because you wouldn't be able to paint it. So details like that, you want to be able to keep that in mind when you're caulking that. They do also have peelable caulks. So they have, sometimes people want to be able to seal something up, but they don't necessarily want to leave it on there. There are caulks out there that you can apply, say in the fall, and then come spring, you can go ahead and peel it right off. Not sure if I fully trust those or not, but they do exist. You can also do, let's say you have a window like this, and it's really leaky right in this area, and it's leaky around the edges and stuff like that. They have a class where they talk about how to make these guys. These are little stretch plastic that you can actually insert right into the window, which is kind of cool. It has little foam pieces. And you can actually insert that right in. And that's a whole class, isn't it, Jason? Yes. Yeah. So you can press that right in. Little foam gasket around the edge makes it so that you can't operate the window, but how many people open their window in the middle of the winter? Anyways.
Fall on your head.
Yeah, you got to put it in right. Don't put it in like I did. But yeah, it fits in there just like that. So you can make these interior storms.
The wrong way.
If you
There's
want
tabs
to.
on the other side.
Yeah. But you can also do the, the window stretch film. So let's say you have trim around this window. This is just showing the inside of it. Oh, sorry. No, it's fine. Where you put the double stick tape around, and then you put the film over it. We have some over there. I'll show you. And then you get the hair dryer, and it stretches out, makes it so it's clear. It makes it so you can't necessarily operate the window, though, if you have like blinds in there or something. So you got to watch out for that. So that's another one. You said older windows especially, they've got a lot of areas, those gaps and whatnot, where air can move in and out. You have exterior storms also. So that's another simple thing you can do where, if that exterior storm is put up and you have a gap where that frame sits against your wood, you can get in there and caulk that with some kind of a paintable caulk. So, like I said, a tube of caulk can really do quite a bit as far as the whole energy efficiency thing. I talked about making sure you get the right style caulk. The other thing is that if you're going to do that, get a caulk that's going to stay flexible. And what I mean by that is, I'll look at this, and you may see some, this one says it stays flexible for 35 years. Some of it is like 10-year. Generally, the cheaper the caulk, the quicker it's going to dry out, crack, fall out, become less flexible, and stop doing what you intended it for it to do. So it's one of those things where you have to kind of think about, you may save $1 on a tube, but you might be doing it, very soon in the future. So, that's the other thing you want to look for. Not only, is it paintable, but how long is it going to stay flexible? A lot of these caulks can be applied on the inside. So I'll pick on a penetration. So let's say you have an exterior wall, right? And let's say you have something that's penetrating through. I'll say this is your drywall side, right? Let's say you have something that's penetrating through. You can caulk around it on the inside. You know, you can also caulk it on the outside. But again, if it's 2 degrees outside, it may not work real well. So you have to kind of keep that in mind also, as far as what the temperature is and when you're working on this. A lot of times, you know, summertime is the absolute best time to be able to do this, because you can use all sorts of materials. You don't have to worry about it freezing and whatnot and actually becoming inefficient, basically. So, you know, a lot of this stuff you can do on the inside also. As far as leak points, other leak points in your house, if you have a basement, you're going to usually have a lot of those. I want to show a picture of this. If you have a basement, you have one area. There's a picture right here. So this is showing this is your foundation right here. This is what's called a mud sill or a sill plate. That's sitting on the concrete like this. Again, you got 2 different materials meeting. So you can see where they're caulking that right there. That's stopping that air from moving through. And then you got 2 pieces of material meeting right here. That gets caulked. 2 pieces of material meeting right here. This would be your subfloor. This would be your rim board or rim joist. And that gets caulked right there. So, like I said, that usually is a huge area where you're going to see that air movement. I've talked about this in other classes also. Sometimes a nice way to be able to find air movement is look for those spider webs. They do like to build their webs where there's a little bit of air movement. So that's a nice way to be able to do that. And why is that important? Why would caulking be important and not just necessarily putting in like fiberglass insulation, let's say in a rim joist? Well, the reason is that if you were to just fill this with like fiberglass insulation, which is what most people will do, the issue with fiberglass insulation is it does not stop air movement. If you've ever pulled out old fiberglass insulation, let's say it used to be pink, and you look on the edges and it's all black, where you have streaks of black in it, what that is that air is moving freely back and forth, and that fiberglass mesh is catching all the dust. So it's turning into a big air filter. That's another way. So let's say you get up in your rim joist and you have fiberglass insulation and you pull out a piece and you look at it and there's streaks of black and whatnot running through it. That just means you have air moving through there. So in that case, by caulking it, you're stopping that air movement with a decent caulk, and then you put in whatever you want for your insulation value, your R value, whether that's fiberglass, whether that's closed cell foam. You can buy these at, you know, in 4x8 sheets. This is a 2-inch closed cell foam. You can cut it with a handsaw. Actually, they had another class where they were talking about it, and it actually is a really nice way. What some people will do is they'll just put that up, attach it somehow, and then squirt like a foam, like something like this around it. And that basically acts as an air sealer, and air does not move through this. So it's kind of a 2-in-1 deal. Some people will wedge them in and then just use like a caulk around it. That works too. So like I said, rigid style foam like this is really a nice way to be able to insulate, because it does not let that air move through. And in some cases you don't want that. So, and we'll talk more about these here in a little bit. So like I said, rim joist areas in your basement, that is one of the biggest areas where you're going to be losing quite a lot of heat or cooling. Attics are another one. So in this here, I'm showing where you have some kind of a penetration, and the penetration really can be even like a light fixture. The penetration can be what's called a bulkhead. I'll draw that in. A bulkhead basically is where you have something like this, you know, and they're usually, a lot of times they're like over cabinets or something. But if you were to pull those apart, more often than not, there's no top to them. So that air, that heat just loves to fly through those. I mean, that's a huge area of heat loss. So can lights are another one. You know, if you have a recessed fixture, it's going up into the attic. We got something here that you can do. This is a really neat little thing. So you have, like, say, a can fixture that's going up, right? What this is that you'd have to crawl up in your attic, but you basically crawl up in your attic. You have this. We'll do it this way. I'll do it on the floor. So let's say you're up in your attic, right? And you move that insulation around, you find the can fixture, and you can get something like this. You put it in there, and then this little thing comes in here like this. And basically what you're doing is you're closing this in. And then insulation goes back around this. Me personally, if I was doing that, I would clean all this out and I'd put a nice bead of caulk and bed that right down in, like onto the drywall or onto the plaster or whatever. I did the same thing with this. I know you would. And then I would actually put that sealant around here and I'd go around the edge to stop all that air movement. So that's stopping that air infiltration. The thing with can lights is that they can become a hazard. We talk about this in electrical class. There are can fixtures that are called IC fixtures and non-IC fixtures. Basically what that means is that if it's rated IC, means that insulation can be dumped around this. So again, let's say you're up in your attic. What will happen is people will put blown in insulation, or they put fiberglass insulation or whatever, and they put it right up to the can. If it's an IC can, meaning that insulation can touch it, that's fine. But if it's not, if it's a non-IC can, that can cause problems and it can actually catch fire and stuff like that. So a lot of times something like this is good because it keeps that airspace a certain distance away from that potentially hot can, and makes it so that by trying to weatherize your home, you're not jeopardizing your house. So like I said, and if that's something that you're not sure on, let's say you have a lot of can lights and you're not sure whether they're IC rated or non-IC rated, sometimes you can get lucky. And look, you have to pull off a lens and be able to look up. And a lot of times there's some kind of a sticker that says IC or non-IC, and I don't see this one on here necessarily, but a lot of times they will say that. Whether that sticker has been burned off over the years is the real question. And that's something to where if you have those and you want to start doing something like that and you're not sure, you may want to get an electrician out to be able to check that. So that's one of those things where trying to do something better for your house can actually cause problems. So the other common areas where air can move in and out relatively easy are outlets. So I'm going to show you what I'm talking about with that over here. So on your exterior walls, or a wall going to that unconditioned space, like outside or your attic. So I'll show you this part first. So this is showing what, you know, before the drywall or plaster's put up. You have these boxes, and they could be metal boxes or they could be plastic boxes. So what happens when they put the drywall up, they cut around these and put the drywall up, or when they plaster around them. What happens a lot of times is that if you pull off that plate, which I did over here, you may see a gap between your box and whatever kind of wall fixture you have. And I bet you money if you put your hand there on a nice cold day, you'll feel that cold air. So what you do is you figure out where, on your panel box, where it kills the power, and then you plug something into it to make sure that the power is off, whether it's an outlet or a switch. So I go ahead and I kill that power. I take off that panel and that cover. And what I'm looking for is a gap. And of course, the one I picked didn't have too much of a gap. But let's say there's a gap right here. And I'll get my caulk and caulk that. And again, this is why you want to do it while it's dead. And I'll smear that in. I'm basically filling up that gap all the way around. You don't have to pull out your outlets or switches. You can kind of work around it. But you'd be amazed how much air movement that will do in a house. Because if you add up all your switches and your outlets and all that sort of stuff,
or
outside
even walls,
exterior walls, right? That it adds up. I mean, if you're looking at it like in a window sense, if you were to add up, say, all of your gaps just from your outlets or from your boxes going up into your attic, so you can do the same thing. Let's say you're having a light fixture changed. You pull that light fixture down, and there's a gap around it. Go ahead and caulk that. But if you were to add that up in most homes, it'd be like opening this window at least halfway and just letting it stay open all winter long and letting all that heat and money right out. So, like I said, sealing up around that with a nice caulk works out real nice. Pretty simple way to do it. Some people will go that next step and put on these little guys. They come in different things. If you have a double like that, you can always get 2 of these. Of course, I had 2 switches. But, after I caulk that around there, I can get in there and be able to put them in just like this, snug it around my outlet. Some people even do this when it's wet and kind of bed it into that caulk. And you can get another one if you have a double like that and then put your plate back on. And it's a nice way to be able to help stop that air leakage. Like I said, that air infiltration is a big one.
Relatively inexpensive way.
Yeah, and it's really cheap. And like I said, windows, doors, all that sort of stuff, it adds up. And like I said, pipes moving out, penetrating out, like I said, in your basement, maybe your water spigot, maybe whatever. You can always caulk around it, foam around it, that sort of thing. Like I said, the expanding foam is really nice. All sorts of different types out there. I do want to say that generally there's 2 types. There's one that's kind of for windows and doors, and we'll talk about that in a sec. And then there's a larger expanding foam. You usually want to use a larger expanding foam for gaps and cracks and stuff like that.
Don't touch it while it's wet.
Yeah, wear gloves. It's nasty. I would say if you do get it on your skin while it's wet, acetone will cut it. That's nail polish remover. So if you have some of that, it's helpful. But once it cures and dries, you're scraping it off. It'll take forever to get off. Wear glasses too. I've had this stuff splatter in my face and it's not nice. So like you said, you definitely want to wear gloves. You definitely want to wear glasses. It is a moisture cure. Most of these are a moisture cure product. So what was the guy's name that did the last class? He was talking about
Sam.
Sam, that's right. Sam was talking about that, and it is really nice. So let's say you're going to be using some kind of an expanding foam. Yeah, just a water bottle. Put it on mist, with a little bit of water in it, do a light mist, and go ahead and foam. And what that does is that moisture that's in there is going to make that stuff expand out nicer. That being a moisture cure product. So, like I said, that sort of stuff works out really nice. And you can cut it afterwards. Once it's dry, you can cut it and you can even paint it. So,
Once it's dry,
right. The difference between these two is the strength. So, I'm going to pick on this stuff for the window and door. The reason they have that is, and again, we're kind of stepping up as far as things that you can do. So let's say you've checked your exterior doors, right? And, you know, you look and you go, man, you know, I've sealed this up, and, you know, on the inside here, I have trim, and you're feeling a lot of air coming through there. A little trick you can do sometimes is to look on this side where your latch is. And sometimes, you know, depending, there might be a good sized gap back there. You can almost stick your finger in there and feel. And, you know, if I don't feel anything, or I feel a lot of air moving through that, it may tell me that this is not insulated between your wall stud and the frame of the door. So at that point, what some people will do is they will actually remove the interior trim carefully and be able to get in here and be able to foam this all the way around. That stops a lot of that air infiltration. If you don't want to get into that, what you can do is, you know, if you have your trim here, you can caulk where the two materials meet, so where your trim meets your frame. Sometimes there's a gap here, and you can caulk there, paintable caulk. And where that trim meets the wall, you can go ahead and caulk that. And that will at least stop that air from wanting to migrate through all those little gaps and cracks. If you want to get in a little further, yeah, you can pull that casing up and be able to insulate that with something like the window and door. Because the issue is, if you use the other stuff, what will happen is it'll actually has enough strength to be able to bow this frame, and you won't shut your door again, or you won't open it. So that's where the window and door, it expands, but it just doesn't have as much strength. It's the same thing will happen with a window, where people, you know, insulate around a window or something like that, and it will bow that thing in, and you'll never be able to open that window until you dig all that stuff out. So keep that in mind when you're doing that. A lot of times what happened years back was people would get fiberglass insulation and they would pack it in. And remember how I talked about that does not necessarily stop air movement. And also to boot, when you compact or squish fiberglass insulation, it loses its R value. So that's where sometimes it may be insulated, but it just may not be insulated properly, if that makes sense. So if you go through that, or let's say you stick your finger in there, you're still feeling air, you stick your finger in there and you feel what feels like fiberglass, and you really want to upgrade that, fine. Take your casing off, remove that fiberglass, get it out of there, do a little light mist, get your window and door foam, clean that up, lay plastic down on the ground though. That stuff is a mess. So, and there's plenty of videos out there and everything else that will talk about that. Talking about caulking. So sometimes you're going to run across, let's say you don't want to get into the foam and stuff. And sometimes you have, let's say, a large gap. I don't care if it's inside or outside. And you want to go after it and caulk it. But you don't want to use a tube and a half of caulk for something that's this long. You can get this foam tubes. And they come in all different diameters. You can buy them in, 20-foot lengths or whatever. And what you do is, if you have a big old gap, you can get this and lay it in. Actually, I'll stick on this right here. You can lay it in and get a tool like a flat bar, doesn't really matter, something. Painter's tool, something. Let's say you have a big old gap like this, right? I can get this and I can lay that in. I'm just using this as an example. I can push that in, and then I'm not using as much caulk, and I caulk over the top of that. It's just kind of a way to kind of save you from having to use a whole bunch of caulk for a big gap. These can be used all over the place. So that's another nice way to be able to do that. I do want to say old style windows. I'm going to pick on these for a second. I've had people actually tear this apart and get upset because they realize they can't do it. So if you have the old style windows that usually have some kind of a cord like this, you can see what this cord does. So when you open this window, this weight actually pulls it down. I've had where people have pulled this off and tried to get in there and insulate that and can't. With this style window, that just doesn't happen. But other style windows, a little more modern windows, yeah, that can be insulated. around. Normally the gap is not quite that big. Normally that gap is about that much.
But enough to make a difference.
Enough to make a difference, right? So like I said, there's quite a bit that you can do with that. We got about 15 minutes left. I want to talk about this foam. So there are a couple of different styles of foam. And I'm going to pick on, this. So let's say I want to talk about what's called a heat sink. So if you have like concrete exposed or block or something like that, like say in a basement, sometimes people's heated basements, what happens is that this is cold. So remember how I talked about that air, that warm air, the hot air runs right to a cold surface and it was absorbed into it. Back to that one. So what happens is if you have a cold wall, you would want to go through and stop air infiltration. So if you have cracks and stuff, you can caulk them or foam them or whatever. And that helps slow down that air movement through there. But if you want to make it so that you put an R value on that so that heat is not going right to that cold block, you again can use foam sheets. You can buy them. Like I said, you can buy 4x8 sheets and stuff and actually be able to glue this up. I do want to say this. There's what's called open cell foam. This is like what coffee cups are made out of. You don't necessarily want that. The reason is it holds moisture. A few other reasons I would avoid this. So you want what's called a closed cell foam. And whatever it is, it doesn't matter thickness. They'll say what the R value is. 2-inch I know is an R10, 1-inch R5, and then, you know, according to whatever thickness it is. So I've seen it where people go through and they'll seal up those gaps and cracks and stuff, and they'll get the sheet. And what they'll do is, again, you can cut it with a handsaw or a little jab saw or something like that to work around things. And I've seen it where people have actually, dry fit it, make sure it fits good, and then use a type of glue that's not going to melt the foam. The glue will say foam safe. Usually polyurethane glue is going to be acceptable for that, but you do want to make sure that glue is proper for that. And I've seen it where they actually glue this up and put something against it, brace it, and that glue dries, and it creates a resistance for that heat to be able to escape. It hits this and it puts an R value on there. There's one issue with that. I don't care if it's this 2-inch stuff or green, doesn't matter. I won't do it here. This stuff is really flammable. If you ever light one of these on fire, they sit there and they melt. They drop flaming blobs of foam. It's not good. So that's where a lot of times people are a little hesitant to do that. But you can do a couple things. I've seen it where people put something like this up and then put some kind of a non-combustible material over it. Yep, that's a possibility. But you can also buy what's called foil faced. And this is kind of the same stuff, but it's got a foil facing on it that is somewhat durable. Sometimes it's a little less durable, but that's actually what's facing out, making it so that it's not a fire hazard in a sense. And you can buy this in all different thicknesses. And even something like this will be enough to kind of help slow down that heat transfer. So like I said, in the basement, sometimes that's a nice way, especially like if you're planning on possibly, say, refinishing your basement or something. One of the best things you can do is put this up against whatever brick or concrete wall that you have, and then go ahead and build your wall in front of it and insulate it. That makes it so it works a lot nicer. But you do have to kind of keep that in mind. Kind of the same deal with up in the rim joist area. You know, same reason that, you know, fiberglass insulation, they say they don't like to see that paper facing out because that's it's flammable. So what some people will do is they may buy a sheet of this and they have scraps of, say, 2-inch or whatever, and you can stack them. I've seen it where people put these up and then have just a thin layer, something that's a foil face to put over the top, be able to caulk around that or foam around that or whatever. And it makes it so that that's less of an issue. So, like I said, you know, as far as, you know, going after the weatherization in your home is the looking for where that air is moving out easily. And so we talk about a loose construction home. That's where air can move in and out, no problems. So by tightening that home up, tightening up all those gaps and cracks and whatnot, that's going to be a huge step in your energy efficiency. Now you have other things too. And this is where the R value comes in. So I would say that's going to be one of your first steps. You can even get to a point where you have somebody come out and they'll do what's called a blower door test. They basically they take off your front door and they put in a thing and they depressurize your house, and it accentuates all those areas where that air is moving in. You can mark it however, and then go back and be able to seal that up. But that's part of it. The other part is the attic. That is an important one. So, you know, if you get into the point where you're sealing up those penetrations, whether around lights or can fixtures or whatever, bulkheads, whatever it is, and this may require you going up into the attic, and it can be a bit claustrophobic and whatnot. But wintertime is kind of a nice time to be able to do that because you're not dying up there at 120 degrees, right? So, you know, if you get up there and you're in this mode,
You have to be careful.
you do have to be careful. You don't want to be falling through your roof and stuff. So yes, you have to be careful. Like I said, you have to be careful for heat. You have to be careful for not breaking through. But you know, like I said, some people are willing to get up there. Great. You can air seal it from up top. You can air seal it from down below. You can add insulation. And again, that's going to slow down that heat transfer into your cold attic, because ideally what it is that you have, let's say, your warm space. Your attic wants to be as cool as possible. So what happens is, I'm going to get rid of these guys. What happens is, I don't care if you're all air sealed, that heat is still going to migrate through your insulation. The more insulation you have, the higher R value, the longer it's going to take to be able to migrate through. Because again, it's trying to get to this colder attic. So it's migrating up through. So you add that insulation. But this is the second part. You need ventilation in your attic. This is showing this is the cold air. So you have, you know, this is a soffit or something. This is bringing in this cooler air. And it's traveling up like this. And the hot air is being expelled out. Whether it's a ridge vent, whether it's a turtle vent or a gable end vent. It's some kind of vent to be able to let that hot air out. But as much as that hot air leaves, the cool air needs to be brought in. And I've seen it where people have blocked this up by adding insulation all in here, and it stops any airflow going through. Yes, this is something you can do on your own, but you do have to understand that sometimes it's even worth asking an insulation company about being able to come out. And, you know, there are places that will go in and they'll pull out the old insulation and they'll put in vent baffles and stuff like that. Yes, you can do that on your own too. And then they'll insulate to make sure that you get that proper air. Because like I said, you want that attic to be cool. We talk about this in other classes because that causes things like ice damming and all sorts of things. So it's not only just about the R value, it's about that ventilation as far as your attic goes. One of the things, I was going to get pictures, but I didn't get them.
Can expanding foam from a can be left exposed, or is it a fire hazard like the rigid foam?
That's a good question. I would say read the instructions to make sure, right? I would imagine that's a real good question. I don't know that for sure. Did you type that, Jason?
I did.
Yeah, maybe. So yeah, I said definitely read your cans. Sometimes just painting them or something like that is going to be enough. I know when we're building houses, sometimes when they have that spray foam exposed, the inspectors ask us to be able to put a coat of paint over it, and then they're happy with that. So you can always call the company and ask them that question. So, but a nice trick you can do, and I said I'm going to try to get pictures of this, is if you live in a climate where it snows, go outside and look on your roof about 2 or 3 days after it snowed. And you will see if you have heat loss. And it's really neat because I can go on and look at a roof and I can almost see where, let's say somebody pulled out a strip of insulation. There'll be a strip, a very defined area where on that roof where that snow melted off. The other areas where that snow has a tendency to melt off is right here on the edge, because what happens is that you can't get much insulation right in this point. And that snow, that heat loss is real great right there. So you lose your snow close to the edge of your overhang here. So in this area right here. Around chimneys is another one. That's another one that's a huge heat loss area. Most of the time, you can look where a chimney's popping through the roof. And yeah, that snow is all melted around that because, again, it's just radiating all that heat out. So yeah, a lot of times you can tell how much money you're spending to heat the outside by just stepping back and taking a look at how much snow melt there is. And if you're not sure if it's normal and you have neighbors, well, you're all looking at the same side. You can look at your neighbors and say, well, they're all covered with snow, and they're all covered with snow, and I'm partially covered with snow. That means I'm usually having heat loss. Yes, there's wind and stuff like that, but for the most part, if you see something out of the norm of the others around you, it's usually an indication that you have heat loss there. And it can even help show where that heat loss is happening. But like I said, that attic is a big area to be able to put that investment in, because again, that heat up and out. So windows, doors, yep, that happens as far as weather stripping around the doors. Sometimes there's weather stripping on the windows where the windows meet. If they're like a vinyl style, it may be like a fuzzy style weather stripping.
Felt.
Huh?
Like felt.
Like a felt, yeah. Where the two panes meet. Slider doors, another one that, there's weather stripping around that. And like I said, most of the time, if you have some kind of a weather stripping that is worn out, you can usually Google it and be able to find out how to replace that, or call the company if you know the manufacturer of the door, something along that line. Maybe something that's a little bit out of the norm. You can always take a picture of it, take it down to your home center, talk to them. They, a lot of times they can be able to help you with that. But I do want to say that probably I would say a good 50% plus is that air infiltration. So if you're by working on that, it's going to help make it more comfortable. Then work on your R value. So you get into other things where, you can insulate your pipes. They talked about this as far as, different diameter pipes and stuff and foam, and you can wrap them. That's going to help save you money. Furnace filters that we talked about in furnace class, making sure your furnace is good and operating properly. That's going to make it so that you're not spending as much money, or the money you are spending for gas is actually being turned into usable heat. There are other things like changing your light bulbs. Way back when LEDs were outrageously expensive, they are dropping in price dramatically. And, you can look at your bill. You can look at, a lot of times you can look at your power bill, and it will break it down saying, you spent this much this month, this much on electric, and this much on natural gas, or whatever it is that you use. And if you're noticing that your electric bill is way up there, by by slowly replacing regular incandescent bulbs with like LED bulbs can make a huge difference. If you look at how many watts, a 65 watt bulb equivalent. So this is equivalent of a 65 watt bulb. It only uses 9 watts. And if you add that up, that's quite a bit. So like I said, that's one of those things. The thing that you have to kind of remember is that people will go through and they'll seal up their home and they'll work on weatherizing it and really dialing in all this stuff. And they may not necessarily see too much of a drop in their energy bill. Sometimes you do, and that's great. But the issue is that energy costs are always going up. They're never going to go down. Hate to tell you. So, by doing this, you're being a little more proactive. And also, too, remember that if you have central air conditioning or even a window unit or something along that line, all this work that you do to think about, keeping your heat in your house does the same thing for keeping that cold in your house. So like I said, if you use air conditioning in the summer, all this work is a benefit in the winter and in the summer. So like I said, there's quite a bit with the weatherization, and that's why I said we touch on this in a lot of other classes. But hopefully this was broken down enough, I guess, to make a little more sense. Like I said, if you guys have questions that I can actually answer, I'll try. But other than that, I think I've run out of time. We good, Jason?
Thank you very much, Lee.
All right.
That was great. And thank you, Lori, also for filming tonight.
Oh, you're welcome.
Step out of the way of the camera.
I wanted to thank everyone for joining us tonight. Great workshop. And especially for Lee teaching this one. Next week will be our workshop will be talking about frozen pipes and how to avoid frozen pipes. So make sure to tune in for that. Otherwise, have a great evening, and thanks again for joining us.